Hi folks, I'm Matt and welcome to My Expanded Universe, a show where I go through the entire EU in chronological order as best I know how. Folks, at long last we have come to the end of the Old Republic. But even though it's the end, doesn't mean it won't be the best part of the story. Now before we get to the meat of our discussion, let me first take you to Star Wars Gamer number 5 and the short story called Darkness Shared. Now it's written by Bill Slevesky, and it's talking about a Jedi Master and a Padawan who are in pursuit of a Sith. Now during a confrontation in space, both of them crash on a planet where the fight must take place and go to its bitter end. What will happen? Well, it's a short story, you'll have to read it. Now it neither takes place in the Knight Errant era or the Darth Bane era, which we're about to talk about. It's just a little short story that goes in between there, and it's a fine read. Not necessary in your quest through the Old Republic. You won't miss anything if you miss that story. But still, I thought it was pretty good. But now it's time to get to the novel that you've all been waiting for, right? Drew Karpyshyn's Path of Destruction. Basically focusing on Darth Bane himself, the life and time of Darth Bane, from when he was young to when he became Dark Lord of the Sith and reestablished that rule of two, right? It was actually a really good book. What Drew Karpyshyn does really well is he really builds Bane into a character that you're very, very interested in the whole way through. To be honest, in this first book, there is not a boring part to talk about. Honestly, there isn't. The whole way through, you are enraptured and you want to know even more about Bane. It's why he's such a popular character is because of these books. Now, after those books, chronologically, you'll want to go to Dark Horse's Jedi vs. Sith. Now, it was a 6-issue series written by Darko Macon, and it basically depicts the final battle of Ruusan, where the Brotherhood of Darkness took on the Army of Light. What did I think of the comic book series? It was okay. I thought it had a lot of good art. I thought the story was really good. These actual events in the comic book are actually recounted in the novel Path of Destruction, the last few chapters. The comic book kind of rests on the other side of the conflict. It doesn't really focus on Darth Bane at all. The comic book doesn't. It focuses on these 3 kids, which you'll learn later on what will happen to them. One of them goes on to become Darth Bane's apprentice. And so that to me was kind of interesting. People have noticed that there are a few contradictions within the comic book and the novel. And here's what I mean by contradictions. Some of the words are said differently in the comic book, and then the dialogue in the novel of the same battle are said differently. To me it's tomato. I don't really know if you can call that a contradiction since the same story took place. They don't have to say things word for word. Now, the other contradiction they would say is there was a Sith in there who actually died during the thought bomb. Now, in the comic book, she died, but she got to speak to Darth Bane before her body blew away as dust in the wind. Really cool scene in the comic book. But she was already dead, so I don't think that's really a contradiction. Jedi vs. Sith came out before Path of Destruction. I honestly would encourage you to read Jedi vs. Sith first, and here's why. It puts a lot of faces to the names that you'll be reading about later on in Darth Bane's book. So wouldn't it be nice to kind of know what they look like and kind of get an idea of who's saying what when you're reading the novel? I don't know, that's just me. If you want to read it in chronological order, go right ahead. There's no problem with that. It's basically going to be recounting those final tales of the Battle of Ruusan. Either way, once you're done with that, it's time to go back to Star Wars Gamer number 3 and read Bane of the Sith by Kevin J. Anderson. And basically it's a short story about Bane trying to find a Sith holocron after the Battle of Ruusan. Now, this is kind of interesting because it was Kevin J. Anderson's last short story to write in the expanded universe ever. He never wrote anything else after that short story. And oddly enough, it's Bane's first published appearance in the Star Wars universe. Now remember, Darth Bane was a character who was created by George Lucas. And he'd always told the story of it, and Kevin J. Anderson had taken that story and made a little short out of it. So it's a fantastic story. But here's where we have our first contradiction. That's right, an EU contradiction. And it happens in Rule of Two by Drew Karpyshyn. This is basically the sequel to Path of Destruction. Now, just real quick, the Rule of Two is basically Bane's establishing that new Sith order, and Jedi Master Haas Padawan, Bane killed his master, but his Padawan still believes that Sith survived that Battle of Ruusan, and so he's going to go looking for Sith, aka Bane. Now, in the middle of this, Darth Xana is confronted with someone from her past, and then of course Bane finds a way to make him even more powerful against his enemies. Folks, it's a fantastic read. Don't get me wrong, I love this one. In fact, comparing this one to the first one, they are both equally good. But here's where the contradiction comes into play. You see, Kevin J. Anderson wrote this short story a long time ago, and the same events from Kevin J. Anderson's short story are included in the Rule of Two novel. And here we have a conflict on how things went down. It's basically the same story. The same thing happens to Darth Bane, but there's different dialogue and different ways things came about. Not too bad. For instance, Kevin J. Anderson is portraying Bane as someone who is haunted by the Sith ghost from the Battle of Ruusan, the Sith ghost there, which could be the case, and you could say that would be affecting his mind, and so he saw events a little bit differently than you saw in the novel. The same thing happens. The same goal is achieved in the short story and in the novel. It just looks like it has two different accounts. And I think I know the reason why. You see, Rule of Two was a rush job. It was created in 5 months and sent off to publishing. What had happened is that Lucasfilm had approved one extra book to be printed that year. See, Lucasfilm would only allow a certain amount of books. They didn't want to just water down the market with, say, 20 books in a year explaining things. They could only have a set amount. But Lucasfilm said, hey, you know what? You can print one more book this year. And they're like going, oh, okay, how are we going to get a book out this year? So Sue Rustoni called up Drew Karpyshyn and asked him, can you do a sequel to Path of Destruction? Because it was a real big seller. And Drew goes, sure. And he wrote in 5 months they had that sucker published. Now, due to it being rushed, which, by the way, Rule of Two does not feel rushed at all. I was shocked when I read that fact. You'd think it was slapped together, but honestly, it didn't feel that way. It didn't have that rush feeling at all. It was really well done. But because of that, he didn't have time to check all his facts. He knew about Kevin J. Anderson's story, he just didn't include it verbatim like Kevin J. Anderson did. So I think that's the real reason there are the conflicts. Of course, in Kevin J. Anderson's book, at the end of it, Darth Bane's saying he needs an apprentice, and he will find his apprentice. No, it doesn't say he needs an apprentice, he needs to find his apprentice, is all it says. So he needs to find his apprentice on Onderon. Now, you're thinking, wait a minute, if you're reading this chronologically, then Star Wars Gamer 3 happens after Path of Destruction. He already has Darth Xana, so why does he need to go find his apprentice? Maybe, and this is just a different telling of it, maybe he just says, hey, I need to go find my apprentice. I know where she is, she's on Onderon, so I need to find her on that planet. Like, he already knew who his apprentice was at this moment. See what I'm saying? So, in essence, that could be true from a certain point of view. But I think that's the reason for the contradiction between the two stories. Remember, they both achieve the same thing. Darth Bane's story doesn't change, just the events on how he got there are a little bit altered in Kevin J. Anderson's short story and Drew Karpyshyn's story. But that's because Rule of Two was a rush job, and he probably didn't have time, and no one had time to fact check him because they were trying to get it published immediately. Now, I'm so glad they did because, of course, that set up our third book. It's called Dynasty of Evil. It's 20 years after the Rule of Two. And you see, in this book, Bane doesn't feel that Darth Xana is the right apprentice. Like, she's never challenged him. It doesn't look like she's the one to lead the Sith into the millennium. So he's thinking, dang, I need to find a way to be immortal. So he sends her off on some fluff run to do something so he can just get rid of her so he can go off on a quest to find immortality so he can live forever and preserve the Sith line. Now, Darth Xana's not an idiot, and she knows what Darth Bane's doing. But what Darth Bane doesn't know is she's been plotting against Darth Bane this whole time. She's just waiting for her moment to pounce. And pounce she does, because at the end they're going to face off and only one will come out as a winner. Now, what did I think of Dynasty of Evil? Just as good as the other two. Honestly, folks, this whole trilogy is well worth your time. I might even go as far as saying this may be the best book series in the Old Republic, maybe. Just because I really, really, truly enjoyed it. Now there is a little puzzling ending in the book, Dynasty of Evil, where it had a lot of people talking about what really went down at the end. Because I'm not going to do spoilers here, but one person dies. Or do they? No, Drew Karpyshyn said years later, because the fans were just outraged, what happened? They were just contemplating, no, are they still alive? Are they not? Are they really dead? What's going on? And Drew Karpyshyn finally said, yeah, that person who lost is dead, for real. But he did put a little twist in the ending to make you think, maybe that person's still alive. It was really good. So overall, this is an excellent trilogy. If you've read it already, then you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, then what are you waiting for? Yub Nub and I love this story. It is our absolute favorite in the Old Republic. Isn't that right, Yub Nub? He's still giving me the silent treatment after last week. I'm sorry for leaving you out in the snow. Don't do that again. Okay, that does it. Yub Nub? Where are you? Yub Nub? Good fighting! Good fighting! We'll see you next week with another video.